Night in the open fields was unlike the night within walls. No curfew bell tolled across hedgerows, no lantern swung at every corner. Instead, darkness spread unbroken, a vast cloak settling over meadow, moor, and forest edge. The land was quieter, yet never wholly silent, for the creatures of the night stirred when men withdrew. Owls drifted from hollow trees, wings soundless but cries sharp. Foxes padded along hedgerows, eyes gleaming faintly, pausing to sniff the air before darting on. Hares and hedgehogs moved cautiously through grass, and now and then the howl of wolves, rarer but feared, carried across the hills. For the peasant who lived by his animals, night was no simple time of rest. Sheep needed watching in lambing season, when ewes groaned and stumbled, their young slipping into straw by moonlight. Cows lowed uneasily, their breath steaming in cold air, while oxen shifted heavily in stalls. Pigs rooted and squealed in pens if startled by fox or dog. Even horses, beasts of labor by day, could start at the rust of leaves, kicking at stall doors in panic. A family's wealth was often tied to these creatures, and so at least one watchful soul kept half-wakeful ear through the dark. Shepherds, in particular, were bound to night. Their flocks grazed on common pasture, vulnerable to theft or predator. Wrapped in cloaks of rough wool, staff in hand, dogs curled at their feet. They dozed in turns beneath hedges or in huts of wattle and turf. Their dogs, keener of sense, growled at distant movement, ears pricked toward unseen rustles. To be a shepherd by night was to live half in the world of men, half in the world of beasts, learning to trust moonlight, wind, and barked warnings as guides. Moonlight was ally and enemy both. On clear nights, fields glowed pale, shadows long, paths easy to trace. Men could walk to barns or wells without stumbling. Farmers could check fences. Lovers could steal meetings. But on moonless nights, darkness was thick as cloth, and every step was guesswork. Lanterns helped little against the wide dark, their glow swallowed in a few paces. Travelers cursed such nights, fearing ditches, thieves, and worse. Folklore whispered that spirits favored the moonless dark, drifting unseen across fields where no man dared tread. Work sometimes called men out even then. Bakers rose at midnight, fetching water, kneading dough by lamplight, so bread would be ready at dawn. Millers tended water wheels and windmills, their groans and creaks echoing strangely in stillness. Carters leaving early for distant markets rattled along rutted tracks, their wheels sparking on stones. Farmers crossed fields to tend irrigation channels or to guard orchards heavy with fruit. The night did not wholly belong to rest. It was also the laborer's extended day, pushed into darkness when need pressed. Poachers moved in silence through hedgerows, bows strung, snares set. Their steps were careful, their ears tuned to every stir, for discovery meant heavy fines or worse. The night was their ally, cloaking movement, muffling sound. Lords cursed their theft, yet villagers sometimes turned blind eye, for a rabbit snared might mean meat for a family's pot. Moonlit fields thus became contested ground, half farm, half hunting ground, where law and hunger wrestled in shadow. Superstitions wrapped the fields as tightly as mist. Folk said that will-o'-the-wisps drifted from marshes, leading men astray into bogs. They told of phantom riders crossing moor at midnight, their horses silent, their cloaks fluttering though no wind blew. Stories of witches gathering herbs under moonlight, chanting over cauldrons, warned children to stay indoors. In some places, crossroads were feared, thought to be meet points for spirits. Night magnified the unseen, make every stump a lurking figure, every gust a whispered voice. Yet there was wonder too. On clear nights stars blazed in numbers uncountable, constellations stretched across the sky. Shepherds learned them as guides, naming them, telling stories of hunters, bears, and saints traced in light. Farmers marked the seasons by them, knowing when to sow, when to reap. Children lay in grass, staring upward, marveling at the silver dust of the Milky Way, whispering questions that even priests could not answer. Night in the fields was frightening, but also vast, humbling, beautiful. Festivals sometimes reached into fields after sunset. Bonfires blazed at midsummer, sparks racing skyward. Harvest suppers spilled into barnyards, music and dancing carrying far into the dark. Men carried torches through orchards, blessing trees with song. Such nights transformed fear into joy, making shadow a companion rather than a threat. Yet when the fires died and the crowd dispersed, silence returned thicker than before, and the solitary shepherd or farmer felt the weight of night again. For the traveler caught late on road or field, night was ordeal. Inns barred their doors at curfew, leaving wayfarers to seek barns, haystacks, or hedges. Wolves prowled in stories, if not in truth. Thieves were real enough, and the cold itself could kill. Lantern in hand, cloak wrapped tight, the traveler prayed for dawn, each hour dragging like a year. To sleep beneath open sky was to place trust in Providence, for no watch but the stars kept guard. Thus the medieval fields at night were a world both alive and hidden. They belonged to shepherds, poachers, wanderers, and beasts. They echoed with hoots, rustles, and distant cries, but also rang with silence so deep it pressed upon the chest. They were places of fear, of necessity, of labor, but also of awe. And when the cock crowed and dawn washed the dark away, the fields revealed nothing of their mysteries, leaving only dew on grass and stories whispered by those who had kept vigil. When the curfew bell tolled and shutters closed, most households folded into quiet. Yet not every soul yielded so soon. In towns, along highways, even in the shadow of monasteries, taverns, and alehouses kept their doors open longer than law allowed, glowing like small hearths of noise and fellowship in the deepening dark. The tavern was not only a place of drink, but of company, where men and women shook off the weight of day and entered the looser world of night. The tavern sign was often a simple board, painted with a jug or a beast hanging on chains that creaked in the wind. Its windows, small and leaded, spilled faint yellow light onto the street. Within, rushes covered the floor, trampled and fragrant with ale and smoke. A great hearth blazed at the center, filling rafters with haze, and tables sprawled in uneven rows. Benches were crowded, elbows pressed close, voices overlapping in a stew of sound. The air was thick with the smell of malt, sweat, roasted meat, and the sharp tang of spilled drink. To step into such a place after the silence outside was to plunge into another world, a world that belonged to night. En Ale was the heart of this world, brewed by wives in cottages or by alewives in town. It was carried in pitchers foaming and brown, tankards of wood, leather, or pewter slammed on tables, spilling froth down sleeves. Stronger drink, mead sweet with honey, wine brought from distant vineyards, was dearer, but taverns near ports or fairs sometimes offered them. Men grew loud as the drink deepened, songs began, disputes kindled, laughter rang. Ale was the equalizer. Noble and peasant might sit shoulder to shoulder, their voices mingling in chorus none could distinguish by rank. Food, too, played its part, a joint of beef turning on the spit, dripping fat into the flames, a pottage steaming with beans, onions, and herbs, loaves broken into chunks, cheese cut in rough wedges. Taverns fed the hungry as well as the thirsty, though quality varied. A roadside alehouse might serve only bread hard as stone and broth thin as rainwater, while a town tavern near the market could offer feasts fit for guildmasters. Yet eat coarse fare tasted richer at night, when bellies growled and drink sharpened appetite. Music was never far. A fiddler sat on a stool, bow flashing, drawing quick reels that set feet stamping. A piper leaned in the corner, cheeks puffing as shrill notes cut through the roar. Drums, tambourines, even spoons clattered, joining in rhythm. Voices lifted into songs known by all, ballads of saints, tales of battles, love songs sweet or bawdy, drinking chants shouted until throats ached. Music wove strangers into companions, strangers into friends, binding the tavern together for a night. Dice rattled on boards, cards slapped, coins clinked into piles. Gambling was as old as the tavern itself, a lure as strong as ale. Men leaned close, eyes sharp, fingers quick. Fortunes for the weak might be lost in a handful of throws, laughter and curses rising together. Priests preached against it, lords outlawed it, but still dice rolled, cards turned, coins changed hands. The tavern's night belonged to risk as much as to fellowship, and every throw carried both thrill and dread. Not all within the tavern came for drink or play. Travelers stopped for shelter, finding straw in lofts above the common room, lulled by the roar of voices below. Messengers broke their journeys with ale, sharing news from distant towns. Minstrels carried songs from one tavern to another, their verses shifting as they traveled, reshaped by every fire they sang beside. Merchants closed bargains here, whispering over tankards. Lovers slipped glances, touched hands beneath benches. For a few hours each night, the tavern was crossroads as well as hearth. Women played their part, sometimes as alewives who brewed and served, sometimes as entertainers, sometimes as patrons in their own right. Alewives were figures both respected and mocked. Their signs hung proudly, their ale judged harshly or praised loudly. Ballads teased them for short measure or weak brew, yet their trade was lifeblood, and their presence gave the tavern its warmth. Serving women carried pitchers and platters, dodging grasping hands, enduring jests, quick with tongue and laugh. Their laughter could soften quarrels, their scolds could silence drunks, their presence shaped the tone of the room. But taverns were what without danger. Quarrels flared easily, knives flashing when ale sharpened tempers too far. Thieves worked the crowd, slipping purses from belts, vanishing into smoke and song. Fights spilled into streets, leaving bruises, broken teeth, even corpses in the ditch. The watch frowned on late taverns, but their patrols rarely ventured inside. The tavern was its own law, its own kingdom of night, where men tested limits and bore consequences. Still, the tavern was more than drink and brawl. It was release. After days bent in field or shop, after weeks of toil, men and women found here the easing of shoulders, the loosening of tongues. Songs carried away sorrow, dice distracted from hunger, laughter broke the back of weariness. The night within the tavern was not holy, but it was human, answering needs as real as prayer. Stories grew in taverns as fast as foam. Travelers told of distant lands, of storms survived, of saints' shrines glimpsed on pilgrimage. Locals repeated gossip of neighbors, of lords, of wars rumored. News traveled faster by tankard than by parchment, passed from ear to ear until truth and fiction blurred. Taverns were the pulse of the town's night, where words were as intoxicating as ale, where the world grew larger with every tale told. When candles guttered and barrels ran low, when voices cracked and heads nodded, the tavern's night ended. Some stumbled home through dark lanes guided by memory more than sight. Others slept where they sat, faces pressed to arms on tables. The last embers smouldered in the hearth, rushes littered with crumbs and spilled ale, dice forgotten on boards. Silence crept back in, reclaiming the place until the next sunset. Yet the memory lingered, a song hummed the next morning in the fields, a jest repeated at the loom, a rumor whispered at market. The tavern's laughter bled into day, lightening labor, feeding imagination. Though priests preached against it, though law curtailed it, taverns endured, for they were as necessary as bread, as inevitable as thirst. They gave night its voice, its song, its warmth, and without them the medieval darkness would have been far colder. Darkness in the Middle Ages was not merely the absence of light, it was a presence, thick as wool, that pressed against shutters and seeped beneath doors, a living thing that breathed along lanes and hedgerows. When the sun slid away and the bell commanded embers to be covered, the world changed its temper. What had been familiar by day, beam and bench, path and pond, took on other faces, and the heart learned again to keep a steady pace in the company of its own misgivings. Within houses, fear did not shout, it whispered. The hearth, banked and sleeping, shed a low red like a creature at rest, and the rafters spoke in small clicks as the day's warmth crept out of the wood. Children lay in straw and watched the room grow taller and stranger, where a hanging cloak became a hunched watcher, and a broom by the door bent like a crone. Mothers crossed themselves and kissed brows, murmuring a psalm. Fathers laid a knife within easy reach, not to challenge spirits, but to comfort the living. Fear, tamed by habit, still kept a stool by the fire. Some families hung iron above the threshold, a twisted nail, a horseshoe, a bit of broken chain, because iron held a virtue stones did not. They tucked rowan twigs into the thatch, or stitched a small cross of rushes behind the bedboards. A pinch of salt lived near the door, a sprig of St. John's wort dried in the rafters to push back whatever sought entry. These were not grand talismans, but the handful protections remembered from elders, simple, stubborn gestures against the largeness of night. In towns, fear had edges. The street narrowed into a throat where sound carried too well, the watchman's staff on stone, the distant hinge complaining, the cat that shrieked with no cause a Christian could name. Lanterns through small, obedient circles, and beyond them the dark spread like wet ink. Men barred their shutters because men, not phantoms, were quick to test a loose latch. A purse hanging on a peg drew the eye of thieves. A curl of smoke from a hearth woke the town's old grief for houses lost. So fear there wore two faces, one that looked like the devil painted on a church wall, and one that looked like a neighbor with idle hands. The watch walked to quiet both. They sniffed for the soot-sour of a fire badly banked, felt doors with the back of the hand for heat, rattled latches gently to be sure the bar held. They challenged shapes that moved when no business should move them, and guided home the ale lost with a shove and a jest. But they also walked for themselves, for courage, because fear, met on its own road, grows smaller by the lamp's edge and by the company of a man who answers when you call his name. Beyond walls, night belonged to other mouths. The fields breathed, the hedges rustled with small lives. Owls stitched darkness with their calls. A shepherd, sitting his turn in the fold, learned the dialects of fear, the quick scuffle of a fox bold as a petty thief, the weighty stomp of cattle shifting, the sudden stillness that means a bigger shadow has come to stand and listen. He kept a staff for wolves that perhaps were fewer now, but never fewer in story. He kept a dog for all the rest, and he kept a prayer for what neither staff nor dog could put to flight. Travelers counted fear by milestones. One more bridge and a safer inn, one more ridge and the gate before curfew, One more field, and no ditch to swallow a wheel. When a man must walk by night because a child was sick, or a summons had come too late, or a hireling had led him wrong in the lanes, he went as a small boat goes, hugging the shore, minding the slowable dangers, and accepting that the wide water beyond his lantern was what for human feet. To the south, where olives lived and the hills rose dry, night smelled of dust and time. Men there feared knives in alleys more than wolves at the fold. They feared the sudden press of strangers under a city gate more than bog lights on a fen. To the north, where fir and headland drank the wind, the long winter dark seemed to have a mind of its own, lingering like a guest who would not go. In the Low Countries, mist took the shape of men where no men stood, and marshes spoke softly in the old voices of lost cattle and lost roads. Fear borrowed local clothing. Wherever it went, it dressed itself in what people knew best. The church taught the faithful the names of night's enemies and the forms of defense. The marrow that press upon the chest that steals breath and leaves the sleeper sweating had prayers set against it. Demons who tempted with visions or suffocated with weight met holy water at door and bed. The hours after midnight belonged to matins and lords. The bell that woke monks woke courage elsewhere too. For if men in stone houses were praying in the dark, then darkness had not wholly won. Monks knew their own fears. Cloisters at night grew long as ships, a single taper throwing columns back upon themselves, the black garden beyond answering with cold, damp breath. Yet they walked and sang, because song made a small bridge over fear's waters, and because a man who sings learns where his voice falters and why. In Scriptoria, a single oil lamp bent the day's work into a narrow island. The margin beasts peering from the parchment looked like companions, and sometimes like witnesses. Fear there took a scholarly habit and sat down very close to the ink. Midwives went where bells and watchmen could not. A knock in the smaller hours, a lantern thrust into her hands, a husband pale with the wide terror that fathers hide. She crossed lanes and courts that daytime courtesies would have barred, and she did so with the calm of one who has practiced fear down into obedience. Women, gathered in a laboring room, spoke the warm grammar of presence against the larger grammar of night. When the child came, hands moved by work and prayer together. When the cry lifted, fear bent and made way. Knights and servants too learned fear's contours. A castle by night was what only stone and duty. It was stare and echo and the peculiar knowledge that there were more corners than men to watch them. Sentries walked the wall and understood how a rope feels against stone when thrown by a hand that should not be there. Grooms in stables knew how a horse tells bad weather from bad intention, and that one wicker is worth 3 torches. Fear for them was practical. Where is the bucket? Which door sticks? Who forgets his own footfall? Legends fed the appetite of the dark In some valleys they tell of the wild hunt riders and hounds joyless and unsated, coursing across the sky, disturbing thatch and dream and chicken alike. Men hearing wind claw at shutters crossed themselves and drew blankets to their throats. Those abroad threw themselves flat and pressed their faces to earth, as if the soil could claim them as kin for the hour, and oh, spare them. The hunt did not ride for the godly, they said, but they said it softly, and they did not test the rule. Crossroads held a law of fear. Where ways meet, stories meet, and not all stories shake hands. Their suicides were buried beyond the churchyard, a shame that frightened and hardened. Their peddlers swore they had seen lights that floated as if held in careful hands, then winked out when called to account. Crossroads collect choices, and men fear choices most when no sun stands to bless the right one. A lantern held high at such a place throws a strange sort of light. It illumines, and yet it shows how much remains unlit. Witches by witch daytime meant often the lonely, the learned in herbs, the brusque-tempered, the unwed beyond the usual years, walked the lanes of rumor long before they walked the stake in later ages. Night slandered where noon might have hesitated. A cow's milk soured, a child took fever, a man dreamed too heavily and woke too tired. The path from harm to blame ran through the nearest door without a husband behind it. Yet those same doors held the poultices and the patience that pulled fever down and eased bone to knit. Night is unjust. It does not measure kindness before it invents crimes. Not all fear wore the black hood. There was the pale cloak of shame. To be seen out after curfew without cause was to shoulder the town's eye for a week. A woman returning from her mother's hearth must walk as if stepping from a priest's shadow. A man creeping to a borrowed bed learned that doors have more ways to speak than hinges do. Fear of tongues travels faster than fear of ghosts. Men will line their lives to avoid the mouths of neighbors more strictly than they line them to avoid the teeth of wolves. Children learned fear in play. They told each other in whispers almost luxurious of the nun without hands who begs at windows, of the black dog that carries a coal in its jaws and drops it on the palates of the careless, of the miller who sold his shadow for a purse that never empties and now must walk only at noon or mistaken for the road itself. Having said such things, they ran giggling for the latch and begged for a candle stub by which to make courage into a game. The game worked, most nights. Fire gave fear its sharpest teeth. Every man in the street knew the sound that mattered most. Not the cry of thief, but the lower, graver shout of fire. A lamp knocked, a drunkard's cloak to the coals, a spark that leapt to rushes. Fear grew legs and ran roof to roof, while men ran bucket to bucket. Afterward, when water had made mud where tables had been, and smoke wrote its long black letters on beams that stayed, the town slept badly for many nights. It listened for a sound it had already heard, and in waiting for it, heard it everywhere. Storms trained fear to kneel. Thunder walked the sky like a lord with iron shoes. Lightning wrote on the retinas images the soul could not pass. Many houses kept a candle blessed at Easter, tucked away and brought out when clouds assembled like men with arguments. Priests rang bells to break the sky's temper. Field hands turned their faces into rain and recited the psalm that knows all valleys. Night, already a country, became two countries when the storm passed over it, and men loved their houses more for having felt them stand. Sometimes fear could be counted in coin. A merchant, hands inked from his ledger, buried a small hoard beneath an oak before riding to the fair, not because he believed in goblins, but because he believed in men with knives and debtors with foggy memories. He walked home lighter, and he slept lighter too. His wife scolded him for the hole in the yard and then wrapped bread in cloth for the journey. Both of them, practical and devout, said nothing about the rumor that under the same oak, on moonless nights, a blue flame danced over the soil as if breath had turned visible. Fear has its own music, and the countryside knows its notes. Late in the night, the cock that crows off habit sets a house on its elbows. Dogs answer each other across hedges like old men trading doubts. A cart on the far road, wheel complaining, sounds uncomfortably like a congregation going to a funeral. Slow, grave, inevitable. In the silence between such sounds, a man hears his name spoken by a voice he neither place nor deny. Then he laughs softly, puts his hand to his chest, and feels the heart work like a mill wheel, and remembers that fear is a craftsman, and the body is its shop. But fear also teaches devotion. It encourages the counting of blessings by making their absence briefly visible. Bread taken by day, fire submitted to by night, the roof that continues to be a roof, the child that continues to breathe. These are mercies the bright world does not insist upon being noticed. The dark insists. It taps at shutter and calls through keyhole and rubs along the eaves like a fox's brush and whispers, "Have you counted?" And when the counting is done, men and women find that gratitude is a lamp that does not gutter so quickly as tallow does. And it teaches fellowship. A neighbor who hears your cough through the thin wall and speaks your name is no longer only the man with the spoiled cart and the opinion about sheep. He is a proof against the night's theory that everyone is alone. The watchman who nods to you, the baker who begins his bread while others sleep, the monk who rises to sing, all of them lay threads across the dark, and the fabric is stronger for having been woven where it was needed most. Folklore does not only invent fears, it promises repairs. A bowl of milk left at the threshold for small folk not acknowledged by priests may bring peace in a house where things are misplaced. A nail driven into the lintel on a waxing moon may give the door a steadier mind. A charm stitched into a child's sleeve with thread drawn from a candle blessed at Candlemas may persuade nightmares to try another bed. Whether such things work is a matter for bolder tongues. What matters is that hands do them and hearts grow quieter after. There are too the nights when fear is right, a man who trusts his dog's low growl and waits within until dawn draws a thief into the open and into shame. A woman who refuses the shortcut by the marsh and takes the longer lane arrives with dry shoes and a whole life. A shepherd who rises at the niggling of a doubt he cannot name finds a gap in the hurdle and 3 lambs wandering, saved before the fox could claim them. Fear is a counselor, inexact, a little fond of drama, but elsewise not stupid. Yet a person cannot live only on counsel, so the night also allows for beauty, and beauty makes a counter-argument. Step outside when frost has written its primer on every thatch and hedge. Look up where God has spilled fire salt across the heavens and not tidied it away. Hear the far river keep its soft speech to itself. Feel your breath go up in white, and know yourself for one moment forgiven for your human smallness. The old fear withers there, not vanquished but willing to sit down and listen to the greater lesson, that the world is larger than any dread within it. By dawn, fear has spent itself into stories. At breakfast, someone tells how the door rattled twice, and a child laughs and says it was only the cat. Someone else confesses the oak made a sound like a door, and all agree that oaks are untrustworthy at night. A third swears he saw a light move uphill against the wind, and the table falls silent for the brief space where wonder lodges. Then the loaf is cut, and the day asks for its due, and the night goes to ground, until evening lifts the latch again. So medieval fear of the dark was what superstition alone, nor piety alone, nor prudence alone. It was the braid of all 3, plaited to hold. It had teeth, wolves and thieves and fire. It had faces, spirits and slanders, and the eyes of the jealous. It had uses, pulling families close, teaching the counting of mercies, making room for songs that sound better in low voices. In fearing the dark, people learned the dimensions of their courage and the portion of their trust. Night did not conquer them, it trained them. And when the bell lifted the cover from day again, the people who stepped into light were what the same as those who had set the shutters. They were smaller and wiser and, somehow, more at home. Night was not only a curtain, it was a roof of signs. When the sun went down and candles shrank the world to small islands of light, the sky opened into a sea more spacious than any ocean. Men and women who had no clocks read their hours in constellations and their seasons in a slow wheeling map of fire. Moon and stars were not ornaments to the dark. They were the letters by which the night wrote its counsel. The moon ruled first. Its changes set a rhythm felt by shepherd and sailor, monk and midwife, plowman and pilgrim. New moon was a black coin slipped into heaven's purse, a night that asked for patience and kept secrets. Waxing nights brought a tender brightness, a white shaving laid along the rim of the world, The quarter moons looked like doors left ajar. At full, the moon walked the fields like a milk-pale lord, laying down paths across ponds and rooftops. Men swore that bread rose better under waxing light, and that certain herbs cut by the full possessed a keener virtue. Whether by faith or by accident, the moon's calendar reached into pots and gardens, into the timing of shearing and the setting of snares. Women watched the moon with other reasons. Monthly reckonings kept step with its phases. Midwives, counting weeks on knuckles, nodded at its disk as if to an old colleague. They swore that some children preferred to enter the world when moon and tides were full of strength, and that others, more bashful or stubborn, waited for the dark. In their small notebooks, more memory than parchment, they set little marks beside months, a private consonance between heaven's face and a child's first cry. Farmers, too, kept lunar habits, planting by the waxing light, pruning in the waning, bringing timber in when the moon was dark. Rules varied by valley and uncle and chance, yet the rules remained. A man who had learned the field by day learned the sky by night. He knew how to find his hedgerow eve when mist tricked the eye, because the old cart track lay under the Pleiades at Michaelmas and under Orion at Epiphany. To travel to the next parish by starlight was no rashness when a man could steer by the laded of the Great Bear, or keep his left shoulder to the belt of the hunter. Sailors were the most faithful to heaven's course. The sea gives little kindness to guesswork. A man afloat learns to love fixed things. North Star, steadfast, patient, was the nail that pinned the sky in place. Whole voyages were hung upon it. From the waist of a cog, a lad looked up, and with one palm's trick against the horizon, judged latitude as cleanly as any scholar's instrument. Moonlight on a calm sea was both lamp and lure, a path laid down in silver, as if some great pilgrim had gone before. In storms, stars vanished, and fear grew large, but the first reappearance of a single bright point in torn cloud made courage rise faster than any captain's shout. Monks mounted the stair to the tower and kept the year by the sky. Easter's wandering date depended upon the full moon after spring's equinox. Lent's beginning slid according to that, and all the smaller feasts from then to harvest took their places along the string. A careful sacristan had his table of numbers and his page of notes, but he also had eyes. He walked into the court on cold nights and watched for first crescent or last, and smiled because God's book agreed with his own. When bells rang for the night offices, they rang not only for hours of prayer, but for places along the moon's slow road. Scholars drew circles upon wax and scratched them again with the shoulder of the stylus. They wrote the names of stars, a mixture of tongues that tasted of desert and sea, and copied diagrams of spheres moving in nested obedience. But being they clever and ink-stained, went out and tipped their heads back like ploughboys. The math was one satisfaction, the sight was another. There is no pride in measuring a thing that does not first humble the measurer. Children learn the sky by telling story. That wain was a baker's cart, forever rolling. Those 3 bright buttons were a giant's belt. That milky smear was spilt flour, or the breath of angels, or a road where saints walk. Each valley had its own names. Each name fell soft on small ears and stayed. Mothers soothed frightened wakings by pointing through the shutter slit. See, the hunter goes his way. He harms no child. Fathers, returning late from the tavern, lifted a boy to a shoulder and traced a line with a rough finger. There. That star will find you home. Moonlight was useful light. It whitened roads, painted hedges with a frost that could be walked through, lifted the black off ditches and streams so a sober foot could pass. Carters, pleased with profit, risked a leg or 2 more by it. Bakers carried flour under it. The watch preferred it for the clean cut it gave to shadow. Lovers praised it for gentleness, thieves for fairness. Moonlight reveals as well as hides. By it, a careful hand could put a needle through cloth, a careful midwife tie a cord, a careful scribe seal a letter. It is its daylight, but it is enough to make of the night a room rather than an abyss. Yet the same light gave birth to fancies. A full moon was blamed for heat in the brain and restlessness in the bones. Men who had drunk too deep said the bright globe tugged at their blood like a tide. Women with sleepless infants swore the child stared at it as at a face. On some nights the circle turned red as a raw wound, shadow of the earth upon it, and a murmur went through villages. Kings would die, or fields would fail. Priests answered with reason, explaining eclipses kindly, but they lit candles all the same, and few men begrudged them the extra brightness then. Stars had their omens too, a fire that raced across the sky, burning its brief verse, set tongues going by dawn. Who threw that spear? At whom? A slow blue lamp at sea. St. Elmo's trembled on a masthead, and sailors, who knew fear's vocabulary, called it a blessing and wrapped their cloaks tighter. Long-tailed comets made the boldest bow the head. They were like messengers, too ragged for court, but too urgent to be turned away. Every age reads its anxieties in the sky. The Middle Ages saw banners there. Astrologers set up their craft at fairs and whispered confidences outside the Guildhall. A birth cast under the sign of this, a journey begun under the face of that. They had charts and seals and sentences for all occasions. The church frowned and tolerated by turns, beating back the presumption that stars rule souls, but allowing wisdom where seasons and humors are concerned. In kitchens, milkmaids had their own astrology. If stars glittered like salt flung high, frost would come. If they were dulled as if behind whetted horn, rain pressed in its soft request. Each art has its ladder, not every rung is firm. In the cold months the sky drew near. The breath of cattle plumed and faded. The wintry moon made panes of ice seem like glass for kings. Stars jingled like harness on a great unseen team. Hearths were hugged tight then, but even those who dreaded crossing courtyards lifted the latch for a look, only a heartbeat, just to reassure themselves that the lamp of the world had not been snuffed. Night air in the lungs is a tonic and a sermon. It says little, but it says it very clearly. Summer made the sky spacious. Long twilights let children play among swallows who scissored the warm air. Bats came after with their quiet mouths. The moon, rising late, found benches still occupied and songs stubbornly refusing to end. Vespers melted into crickets and owls and the private prayers of the unhurried. On the road, a pilgrim with a cockleshell on his hat walked on until the stars made stairs for his feet. He slept in a field and was woken by dew, and later in a tavern swore to others that he had never owned so much as when he had only the sky. Not all gazes were the same. A lord looked up and thought of hunting by torchlight, of hawks flown at dawn from a glove that still remembered heat. A reeve counted weather in the stars' arrangement and considered whether the mowing would begin on Monday. A beggar read no omens but accepted the wide roof as a mercy not measured. A monk, warmed by a cup after matins, recalled the psalm that speaks of the moon appointed for seasons. Different stomachs, same sky. Sometimes the heavens drew men together against fear, rather than toward it. Eclipses, meteors, comets, these brought villagers shoulder to shoulder in greens where fairs were held by day. A hush would fall like an extra darkness. Even the skeptical felt the animal part of the soul prick its ears. When it was over, laughter went up, and somebody passed bread, and a child, emboldened, tried to jump and touch Orion, which made the mothers scold and smile in the same breath. There were too the nights when stars seemed to speak directly, a widow counting her dead, laying each name out like a rosary, looked up and found a bright point exactly at the ridge of her roof, steadier than her tears. A soldier on watch, lonely enough to see angels where none walked, stared until the cold put its teeth into him and understood that courage is sometimes simply staying. A thief with a good purse paused under the eaves and noticed how the moon threw his long shadow along the wall and disliked it. He went home a different way and later told no one why. Maps were made from such gazing. Mariners drew roses on parchment and attached winds to petals. Travelers spoke of a road star that never betrayed them. Monks prepared computus wheels so that holy days would not drift into error. The great clock faces of later cities lay far in the future, for now the sky's clock went unwound and unerring, and every man who could lift his head owned it. Under such a ceiling, sleep came not as surrender but as right. One lay down with a blessing, as if the stars were witnesses. Windows were cracked to give the night a path through the room, so it would not press too closely on the chest. Candles were pinched. The last ember was spoken to, as to a dog, stay. Outside, the moon kept its watch like a discreet friend, checking the corners of lanes and counting the hours without knocking. Thus moonlight and stars made companions of the dark. They gave the night both face and measure. They eased the fear that comes when a man suspects himself the only living thing awake. They also sharpened the mystery. The more one saw, the more knew there was beyond seeing. In that sharpened edge lay the medieval bargain with dark. We will bank our fires and trust you, provided you keep your silver lamps lit and your signs in their appointed places. And most nights the bargain held. To the medieval mind, the world was not silent or empty. It was alive with meaning, full of signs that spoke through stars, rivers, storms, and shadows. Every bird in flight, every change in the sky, every rustle of the forest might be a message. The visible world was a veil, thin and trembling, behind which lay a greater mystery. To live was to listen, to watch, to interpret. A sunrise was not only the coming of light, but a sign of grace renewed. Villagers stood at doors and fields, marveling at golden rays spreading across the land. Each dawn whispered of resurrection, each morning of new mercy. The light itself was a sermon, preaching without words, reminding all that hope was stronger than shadow. The cry of a cock at dawn carried more than noise. It was the bird that, in Scripture, reminded Peter of his denial, yet also of forgiveness. Each morning when roosters crowed, villagers remembered not only the start of labor, but the call to repentance. The cock cry was both a summons to work and a summons to conscience. The turning of seasons was understood, its whole reason. Spring blossoms spoke of rebirth, summer heat of labor, autumn harvest of gratitude, winter cold of endurance. To the medieval soul, the year was itself a sign, circling endlessly to remind them of God order. The earth was not random, it was a book written in soil and sky. Stars glittered above vats, a heavenly manuscript. Constellan told stories, their patterns echoing both myth and faith. The Pleiades, Orion, the North Star, all became guides not only for sailors and travelers, but for souls seeking then. The heavens were read deed scripture, their movements part of divine design. Storms carried lessons as well. Lightning split the sky with sudden brilliance. Thunder rolled like the voice of judgment. Villagers watched with fear and awe, crossing themselves at each flash. They believed storms spoke warnings, reminding humanity of its smallness before power vast and untamed. Birds were seen messengers. A swallow swooping low signaled rain. A raven circling meant change. A dove was peace. Children learned these signs early, repeating sayings that blended weather lore with spiritual meaning. The sky above was not mute, it was full of voices, feathered and winged. The river flow was read like a text. Its constancy reminded villagers of time passing, its floods of judgment, its calm pools of rest. Fishermen spoke of currents if they were thoughts of God, carrying wisdom in their murmuring. Each splash, each ripple was a lesson. Forests were thresholds. By day they offered wood, gain, and shade. By they became places of fear and vision. Many believed saints had walked there. that angels sometimes shone through glades, and that demons lingered in shadows. To enter the forest was to step into mystery. The unseen pressed close. Welcome and thank you for joining me for this quiet journey into the past. In this story, we will take a long, gentle walk through medieval Europe. There will be no rush. We will move slowly, pausing often, noticing details, and lingering on the small things that made up ordinary life. Perhaps as you listen, you will feel your eyes grow heavy. Perhaps the slow rhythm of the words will carry you into sleep, and that is perfectly fine. Even illness carried meaning. A fever might be seen as punishment or purification, a sudden cure divine mercy. Villagers did not view sickness random, but felt a sign, urging repentance, prayer, or gratitude. The body itself was read like a script of the soul. Dreams were taken deed windows. A vision of light might be angel whisper, a shadow might warn of sin. Elders recounted their dreams at hearths, and priests helped interpret them. To sleep was not to leave the world, but to step deeper into it. Symbols spoke more of V. Fire in the hearth spoke of more than warmth. Its flame was holy, reminding families of Pentecost, tongues, and of eternal light. Each spark was a sermon, each flicker a symbol of divine presence. To tend fire was to tend hope. Animals carried lessons. Oxen symbolized patience, sheep humility, dogs loyalty, cats mystery. Their behaviors were read, moral teachings. When a dog barked at unseen presence, villagers wondered if it sensed spirit. When a lamb bleated at Easter, they remembered Christ the shepherd. Even ordinary sounds became signs. The tolling of a bell was more than metal striking. It was a voice of heaven, calling souls to prayer, warning of danger, or honoring the dead. Each note meant something beyond itself, echoing through hearts much through air. Colors carried meaning. White spoke of purity, red of sacrifice, green of hope, gold of holiness. The world was a painted manuscript, every hue a symbol. Even clothing choices on feast days reflected signs, teaching through sight what sermons taught through words. Food itself could speak. Bread was more than sustenance, it was Christ's body in Mass. Wine was joy, but also sacrifice. Even the simplest meal became a sign of deeper truths, linking ordinary hunger to eternal mystery. The village square was a stage of symbols. Fairs meant abundance, processions meant devotion, fires at midsummer meant protection. To gather in the square was to step into a living ritual. Each gesture carried weight beyond its surface. Children grew up learning to see the world by Enchanted. A rainbow was God promise, a shooting star, a prayer answered, a sudden silence in woods, a warning. Their wonder was trained into reverence, so that no moment of life was empty. Elders reinforced this vision. They spoke proverbs, red sky at night, shepherd delight, red sky at morning, shepherd warning. Each saying carried not only weather wisdom but moral teaching. The spoken word kept the world alive with meaning. Pilgrims brought tales of signs from far away, shrines with candles never burned out, relics that healed, visions seen by many. Their stories fed imagination and confirmed what villagers already believed, that the world was full of marvels if only one knew how to look. The church framed these signs within faith. Priests taught that miracles were true, that visions of saints wrought grace, and that nature itself sang of God glory. Yet they warned too of deception, that not every light was holy, not every voice divine. Discernment was part of the lesson. Art in manuscripts and carvings reinforced this vision. Margins filled with vines, beasts, and stars reminded readers that the world was alive with symbols. Church doors carved with suns, moons, and animals turned every entry into an education in mystery. The air of festivals shimmered with signs, a sudden gust at the lifting of a relic, a bird flying over a procession, a bell ringing without hand. These were taken deed proof of heaven nearness. People looked not only for joy, but for wonder in every feast. Silence itself was a sign. When fields stilled, when wind hushed, villagers felt awe. Such quiet was never thought empty but full, a pause where the presence of God pressed close, where words failed and wonder spoke. Children asked questions. Why does thunder roar? Why do stars move? Why do shadows fall? Elders answered with stories, saints with sermons, but always with the same assurance. Creation was not random, but enchanted. To the medieval soul, nothing was ordinary. A candle, a stone, a bird, a cloud, all were layered with meaning. To live was to read, and to read was to live more deeply. The world was a text, and each day a page. Thus, the world enchanted was not superstition, but a way of seeing. It taught reverence for creation, attentiveness to signs, and humility before mystery. To walk a lane, to plow a field, to gaze at stars, all were acts of devotion. The earth itself was holy book, and life its reading. Sleep was not empty silence in the medieval imagination. It was a doorway, a passage from the ordinary world into one where symbols spoke more clear. Dreams were not dismissed, these random, but taken seriously, often in messages from heaven, warnings from spirits, or glimpses of hidden truth. To close one's eyes was to enter a realm where the soul listened, and the night became a teacher. The villagers dreamed of fields and animals, of storms and fires, of births and burials. Such images were not thought trivial. A healthy harvest in a dream might mean blessing ahead, while a field of rot warned of hunger to come. Dreams carried weight, and their symbols were read carefully as scripture. Children, too, dreamed vividly. They woke crying after nightmares of wolves or shadows, and parents soothed them with prayers, sprinkling holy water by the bed. Night terrors were seen, whispers of spirits, and elders taught children to cross themselves before sleep, trusting angels to guard their rest. Saints often appeared in dreams. Villagers told stories of holy figures who came in night visions to guide, warn, or comfort. A sick person might see Saint Bridget or Saint Martin promising healing. A pilgrim might dream of Saint James, urging them onward. Such dreams were cherished, retold, and remembered for a lifetime. Not all dreams were gentle. Some brought fear. Demons were said to visit the sleeping, pressing heavy on chests, filling the night with terror. These dreams taught vigilance and drove souls to prayer. The boundary between spirit and body was thin, and the night revealed the struggle more clearly. Priests and monks studied dreams carefully. Some monasteries kept records of visions, noting patterns and meanings. Theologians debated whether dreams came from God, angels, demons, or the restless humors of the body. Yet none doubted that dreams mattered, for they reflected the soul-hidden landscape. Villagers shared their dreams-round hearths. A farmer might speak of a flooded river in sleep, and neighbors would listen closely, wondering if rains were coming. A mother dreamed of a lost child returning, and the village prayed with her, hoping the vision was true. Dreams shaped decisions and prayers alike. Dreams of animals carried meaning. A dog wagging its tail promised loyalty and safety. A snake warned of betrayal or illness. A bird flying upward signaled hope. Bestiaries and sermons alike used animals as symbols, and villagers entered that logic into the dream world. Colors in dreams mattered. White suggested purity, red blood or passion, green hope, black sorrow. A dream of white flowers was taken promise, while blackened skies brought unease. In this way, even hues of the imagination became signs. Kings and nobles all listened to dreams. Chronicles tell of rulers changing plans after visions in the night. A battle delayed, a treaty signed, a pilgrimage undertaken. Many decisions traced back to a dream believed to come from heaven. The highest and the humblest alike heeded the night. Sometimes whole communities shared a dream. A plague or famine led many to dream of the same fears, their visions shaped by common sorrow. When multiple villagers reported the same saint appearing, the village took it a certain sign of divine presence. Dreams wove people together in mystery. Pilgrims often dreamed on the road. Sleeping under stars, they saw visions of saints guiding their steps, of angels protecting them, of shrines shining in light. These dreams gave courage for the hard miles ahead, turning sleep into prayer. Monks described dreams, Vrels, tempting visions, were tests of the soul, sweet and alluring, but meant to be resisted. Harsh dreams of punishment were warnings, spurring repentance. Dreams were seen not in idle fancy, but at battlegrounds for virtue. Healing dreams were especially cherished. Some dreamed of bathing in holy springs or being touched by saints, and upon waking they found sickness lifted. Such stories spread quickly, drawing others to shrines and relics. The boundary between dream and miracle blurred easily. Nightmares were sometimes explained work of restless spirits. Villagers spoke of witches or demons troubling the sleeping. Charms, Prayers and relics were kept by bedsides to guard against these nightly torments. Faith was both shield and comfort in the dark. Children were taught simple prayers before bed. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. Words wrapped them in safety, keeping the night shadows at bay. Dreams that followed were trusted to be gentle, guarded by the presence of saints and angels. Dreams of death were treated with reverence. To see a departed loved one in sleep was not thought strange, but natural. Such visits were taken and proof that bonds of love stretched beyond the grave, that the dead watched and cared for the living. Dreams were also tied to prophecy. Chronicles tell of villagers who foresaw floods, famines, or fires in visions of the night. When such warnings proved true, the dreamer was respected, touched by divine sight. The night could reveal what daylight kept hidden. Interpreters existed in many places, often blending faith with folk wisdom. They carried books of signs or memorized traditions. To dream of water is fortune, of fire is strife, of bread is blessing. Villagers consulted them, seeking guidance through the uncertainty of symbols. Festivals brought dreams of their own. After long processions, after music and dancing, villagers often dreamed of saints or lights. Their imaginations were filled with sacred images, and the night continued the feast in visions of joy. Even fasting shaped dreams. Empty stomachs led to vivid visions, sometimes of heavenly banquets, sometimes of demons. The body hunger became the soul stage. Images danced more fiercely. Many saw fasting as a way to sharpen the mind for divine messages. In monasteries, visions were weighed carefully. Some were written down and preserved. Treasured long glimpses of God grace. Others were doubted, dismissed as tricks of the mind. Yet even in doubt, the dream was seen then a matter worth prayer. Women often shared dreams in weaving circles. They spoke of visions of children yet to be born, of husbands safe or in danger, of saints appearing in gowns. These conversations turned labor into worship, the loom and spindle becoming companions of mystery. Dreams of journeys were common. Villagers saw themselves walking long roads, crossing rivers, or climbing hills. Such images were understood as signs of life pilgrimage, reminding dreamers that each day was a step toward eternity. Even animals were thought to dream, dogs whimpering in sleep, horses twitching as if they galloped. Villagers believed beasts too shared in the mystery. If animals dreamed, it was further proof that all creation was alive with hidden meaning. For the medieval soul, the line between waking and dreaming was thin. Visions shaped prayers, prayers shaped visions. Sleep was not escape but encounter, not absence but presence. In the night, truth might whisper more clear than in day. Thus, dreams and visions were woven into daily life. They guided choices, comforted sorrows, and confirmed faith. To wake from a dream was not to dismiss it, but to carry its message into morning. The dream was both mystery and mirror, showing souls what they most needed to see. So villagers prayed before sleep, and upon waking, trusting the night to teach faithfully as the day. In dreams, saints visited, angels spoke, and even fears carried meaning. The night was a second world, and in its visions the soul saw eternity more closely. The medieval world was filled with signs that spoke through sky, earth, and sea. When something unusual happened, an eclipse, a comet, a strange birth, a sudden storm, it was not dismissed seen chance. It was read as a message, a portent, a warning or promise. To ignore such signs was foolish, to heed them was wise. The world itself seemed to whisper of things they'd to come. The sun was one of the greatest messengers. When it darkened in eclipse, fear gripped villages. People knelt, whispering prayers, believing judgment was near. Chronicles recorded such events with awe, noting famine, war, or plague often followed. The sky shadow was red, deed heaven warning. Comets blazed fiery portents. Their sudden tales of light filled villages with dread. Some said they foretold the death of kings, others of wars to come. Children stared in wonder, while elders crossed themselves, muttering that God anger had flared in the heavens. Thunder and lightning, when sudden and fierce, were taken aid on. If a bolt struck a barn, it was not only fire but judgment. If thunder rolled on a feast day, it was said to foretell poor harvest or sickness. Storms were sermons in the sky, heard by every soul. Unusual animal behavior carried weight. Dogs howling at night were feared, these signs of death. Birds circling villages foretold change. Crows gathered on rooftops meant misfortune. Even small creatures became messengers, their movements watched with Eight's attention. Births that defied nature caused alarm. A lamb with two heads, a child with a strange mark, a calf born dead. Such things were rarely dismissed field accident. They were signs, read D, warnings of sin, unrest, or sorrow soon to come. Plagues were filled with omen. Villagers claimed to see black shapes in the sky, or ghostly processions of the dead moving through fields. Strange lights at night were taken to aid heralds of death. In times of sickness, every unusual sight was magnified into a warning. Even food, behold portents, a loaf falling from the oven, a pot shattering, a cask of ale souring suddenly, all could be read, vain signs. Some said such things meant famine, others that the devil had touched the home. Ordinary mishaps became extraordinary messages. Fire itself was omen, a candle burning too low, a hearth flame sputtering, a torch going out in wind, each was interpreted. A flame flickering during Mass was thought to signify unrest. Fire, like light, was holy, and its faltering was always noted. The moon, too, carried myths. A blood-red moon at harvest frightened villagers who whispered of war. A halo over the moon foretold storms. When the moon seemed strange, people spoke of disorder. sensing that heaven clock had shifted. Rivers offered warnings, floods that swept weight, mills or bridges were seen meant punishment, while sudden droughts spoke of divine displeasure. To live by water was to live by its signs, reading each change in part of a larger story. Earthquakes shook souls well ground. Even the smallest tremor was terrifying, a reminder that the earth itself could rebel. Many believed such shake was a sign of sin or the nearness of judgment. Churches shook with villagers' prayers after tremors. Unusual sounds were taken seriously, bells ringing without hands, voices heard in the night, groans from the earth, all were omen. Children clutched their mother, elders crossed themselves. The unseen world had spoken, and on listened. Dreams themselves often confirmed all eye. A villager who dreamed of fire before lightning struck was considered blessed with sight. A woman who dreamed of death before sickness spread was heeded tanzab, and Portents wove together in mystery. Festivals sometimes saw oft appear, a sudden storm breaking over a procession, a banner falling, a candle extinguished. All were interpreted dead signs of blessing or warning. The sacred and the mysterious mingled in such moments. Animals at shrines were watched closely. If a dove landed near relics, it was seen holy approval. If a dog growled during Mass, Alv feared evil was near. Creation itself seemed to react to devotion, signaling truths hidden from human sight. Voices of saints were sometimes heard. Villagers told of bells ringing without touch, or hymns sung by unseen choirs. Such mandor not feared but cherished, taken day signs of heaven nearness. Awe and trembling filled hearts at such wonders. Colors in the sky were watched with care. A red dawn meant storm, a greenish hue meant pestilence, strange lights dancing meant war. The heavens were red like scripture, each tint a line in the great message. Children repeated old sayings about if the owl cries thrice, death 'cause the fox crosses your path. Beware, such proverbs passed from mouth to mouth, weaving belief into the fabric of daily life. Weddings and births were watched for signs. If rain fell at a wedding and said it was blessing, others curse. If a child was born under a storm, villagers whispered of future trials. Life milestones were never without symbolic weight. Pilgrims spoke of Omens on the road, lights guiding them at night, sudden storms delaying steps, animals blocking paths. All were taken, mind signs. Journeys were shaped not only by roads, but by heaven hints. Saints themselves sometimes sent our relic carried in procession, that glowed or wept was considered a miracle. A statue falling was seen ain warning. Holy objects became channels through which signs flowed to the faithful. The Church sought to guide interpretation. Priests warned against superstition, but affirmed that God could speak through signs. They taught that Abum should lead to prayer, not fear, and that true meaning was found in repentance and trust. Yet fear remained strong. Villagers often looked anxiously at skies, fields, or animals, wondering what was foretold. The world was enchanted, and its messages would not be ignored. Fear itself became part of faith, urging vigilance. Elders remembered men of the past. They told stories of comets before famine, eclipses before war, storms before plague. These tales shaped how each generation read the present, weaving memory into interpretation. Children grew up steeped in Im. They learned to notice small changes, to repeat sayings, to watch skies and animals with care. Their innocence made them keen observers, and their voices carried warnings through the village. In markets, travelers bought tales of portents far away, rivers turning red, stars falling, monsters born. Such stories spread quickly, feeding wonder and fear, reminding villagers that signs were not local but universal. So Wes and portents filled the medieval imagination. The world was a vast message, written in sky and soil, light and shadow, to see a comet, to hear a cry, to watch a candle flicker. All was to read the handwriting of God upon creation. Thus the medieval soul walked carefully, watching for signs, listening for whispers, interpreting shadows. To them, nothing was random, was meaningful. The world itself was alive with portents, each one urging souls to turn, to pray, to hope. The medieval world was full of hardship, yet it was also full of wonder. Miracles were not distant legends, but living possibilities, expected and sought in daily life. A sudden healing, a spring bubbling with clear water, a candle burning without end, such things reminded villagers that heaven was near, that grace could break into the ordinary at any moment. Wells were among the most common sights of miracles. Springs gushed clear where once there was old dry earth. Villagers believed saints had blessed these waters, and pilgrims traveled far to drink or bathe. Some claimed to be healed of fevers, blindness, or lameness after touching such holy streams. Candles and lamps oft gave signs of wonder. At certain shrines, flames were said to burn without oil, or to flicker in shapes of crosses. Pilgrims carried home small tapers touched by holy fire, believing their light would guard cottages from storms or sickness. Relics carried power, a bone of a saint, a fragment of cloth, a splinter of the true cross. All were venerated fossils of divine strength. Villagers believed relics cured the sick, drove away storms, and brought peace to fields. Their presence was a promise of heaven nearness. Healing was the most cherished miracle. A fever broke suddenly after prayer. A blind man opened his eyes. A crippled child stood and walked. Such stories were told and retold by Hoths, written in chronicles, carved into church walls. The memory of healing gave courage in times of suffering. Animals were sometimes touched by miracle. A cow, barren for years, gave birth after blessing. A sick horse rose after drinking from a holy spring. Since beasts were vital to labor and survival, Their healing was celebrated with much joy, a human cure. Fields too received miracles. A blight lifted after relics were carried in procession. Rain came after prayers, or floods receded when saints were invoked. Such signs taught that no corner of life, not even crops and soil, was beyond divine care. Children often experienced wonders. A child lost in the woods was found unharmed, claiming an angel had guided them. Another fell from height and rose without injury. Such stories spread quickly, reminding the village of heaven protection for the innocent. Visions were counted among miracles. Villagers spoke of sea lights above shrines, of saints appearing in glades or at bedsides. Sometimes only one saw, other times a whole crowd witnessed together. Such visions deepened faith, binding communities in awe. The Eucharist itself was believed miraculous. At times, villagers claimed to see the host glow or to taste sweetness beyond bread. The moment of Mass was not only symbol but reality, when heaven bent close to earth in mystery. Miracles were often tied to saints' feast days. On John Eve, fires burned high without consuming wood. On Slicknivsklavon, then Batigal with Datul Kapha, seen miles at the field. The calendar itself became a map of marvels, each day carrying memory of wonders past. Monasteries kept records of miracles. Monks wrote carefully of healings, visions, and answered prayers. These writings became treasured, proof that God power moved among the faithful. Villagers trusted such chronicles, passing the stories from one generation to the next. Travelers brought tales of wonders abroad. Pilgrims from Compostela spoke of stars guiding their way, from Canterbury of healings at Becket's shrine, from Rome of relics glowing with light. Their words stirred imaginations, reminding even the smallest village of the vast reach of grace. Not every miracle was grand. Some were quiet, a lost object found after prayer, a quarrel reconciled, a sudden peace in a grieving heart. These smaller mercies were counted when wonders no less than great healings, for they touched lives directly. Dreams would be miraculous. A sick person dreamed of a saint touching them and woke cured. A family saw in sleep the place vied food could be found, and in morning their hunger was answered. The night, like the day, carried marvels. Animals often seemed aware of miracles. Birds sat at shrines, dogs lay quietly beside relics, oxen bowed heads, oxen bowed heads, processions passed, villagers, some lies openly offer, found on the Paris and Niwi, that it's my auto and my villagers got set fast to toy while they're beside relics, oxen bowed heads, processions passed, villagers sook. These behaviors pays confirmation that all creation joined in wonder. Some miracles were warnings. A statue wept before famine, a cross toppled before war. Such events stirred fear but also repentance, urging communities to return to prayer. Even stern miracles were counted as mercies. for they guided souls to safety. Children loved miracle stories most. They listened wide-eyed at hearths, repeating tales of saints who walked on water, wells that healed, stars that sang. For them, the world became bright with possibility, every day charged with hope of the marvelous. Festivals often remembered miracles, plays retold wonders of saints, processions displayed relics said to heal, fires lit to honor signs of old, joy and marvel mingled, binding faith to celebration. Pilgrims' badges and tokens themselves were considered miraculous, worn on cloaks or hats. They were not only souvenirs but shields, believed to carry grace into journeys, markets, and homes. A small piece of lead or tin bore heaven touch. Water often bore signs of marvel. Springs bubbled, saints prayed, rainbows arched after prayers for rain, rivers parted for relics carried across. Villagers saw in each drop the possibility of grace. Fire, too, could bear miracle, flames that refused to burn a saint body, candles lit without touch, hearths that glowed brighter after blessing, all reminded villagers that even the most ordinary elements were channels of wonder. Silence itself was sometimes miracle. In a crowded church, when end voices hushed at once, villagers felt awe. The stillness itself seemed touched by holiness, a presence beyond words filling the air. Some miracles came to whole villages. A plague passed over, a storm broke apart before reaching fields. A famine ended suddenly with unexpected abundance. Such collective wonders bound communities, giving them stories to carry for centuries. The Church taught that miracles were gifts, not to be demanded but received. They were signs of God's mercy, reminders of the saints' care, proofs of heaven closeness. Yet priests warned, too, that not every wonder was holy, and discernment was needed. Elders spoke of miracles past. They remembered the day rain came after drought, or when a sick child rose from bed. Their voices carried assurance miracles had happened and could happen again. Memory itself became a miracle of hope. Miracles filled not only churches and shrines, but kitchens, fields, and wells. They made ordinary places extraordinary, reminding villagers that no corner of life was beyond the touch of grace. For the medieval soul, to live was to expect wonder. Each day carried possibility of healing, of vision, of mercy breaking through. Miracles were woven into the fabric of existence, shining threads in the tapestry of life. Thus, the medieval world was alive not only with fear of Amen, but with joy of miracles, both warned and comforted, both taught and blessed. To believe in miracles was to walk in hope, to live with eyes open for grace hidden in the ordinary. For the medieval soul, saints were not distant figures of the past. They were living friends, protectors, and guides who listened from heaven and answered on earth. Their lives were remembered in stories, their relics honored in churches, their feast days celebrated with joy. But above all, saints were intercessors, holy helpers who wrote prayers from village and field into the very presence of God. Every villager knew the names of saints close to their hearts. Saint Mary, the Mother of Christ, was the greatest intercessor. Her name whispered at childbirth, in storms, and at deathbeds. Others called upon Saint Michael for protection, Saint Nicholas for safe journeys, Saint Bridget for hearth and home. Saints were woven into daily life. In times of sickness, saints were invoked first. Families lit candles before images, carried relics to bedsides, and prayed aloud, "Holy Saint, pray for us." Many believed that healing came not from the saint's own power, but from God, moved by the saint's plea. The saint was advocate, a voice in heaven speaking for the weak. Stories abounded of saints appearing in visions. A weary farmer saw Saint Martin encouraging him in the field. A sailor dreamed of Saint Nicholas guiding his ship through storm. These visions were treasured proof that saints walked still among their people, unseen but present. At battle, soldiers carried saints' images on banners before swords clashed. Prayers rose, "Saints, George, fight with us." Many chronicles tell of saints seen on battlefields glowing with light, rallying the faithful. Victories were credited not only to arms but to heavenly allies. Children grew up on tales of saints' deeds. They heard how St. Christopher carried the Christ child across a river, how St. Margaret burst from the belly of a dragon, how St. Francis preached to birds. These stories taught courage, purity, mercy, and inspired trust in the saints' prayers. Pilgrims traveled far to shrines of saints. Compostela for safety James, Canterbury for St. Thomas, countless chapels for Mary and local patrons. They carried hopes for healing, forgiveness, or guidance, believing the saint nearness magnified prayers. The journey itself became a prayer walked on weary feet. Relics of saints were honored with reverence. A bone, a piece of cloth, even dust from a tomb was believed to carry holiness. Touching or seeing a relic was thought to be protection, healing, or blessing. Saints' presence lingered in these fragments, linking heaven and earth. Villages often chose a patron saint on that saint feast day. Processions filled the lanes with banners, candles, and hymns. The patron was not a distant protector, but a guardian of fields, flocks, and families, invoked in every need. Mothers named children after saints, entrusting little ones to their care. Boys were Ho, John, Martin, George, girls Mary, Bridget, Margaret. Each name was a prayer in itself, a hope that the child would live under the saint mantle. Work, too, was sanctified through saints. Blacksmiths prayed to St. Eligius, shepherds to St. Gwendolyn, bakers to St. Honora. Each craft had its protector, reminding workers that labor was holy when offered through prayer. Travelers invoked saints before journeys. Christopher guard us, they prayed at river crossings. St. Nicholas guide us at sea. James lead us on pilgrim roads. Icons stood at crossroads and bridges. Candles burned, signs of trust. Saints were thought to intervene in nature. Prayers to saves and lamb-raising. Places halova nofef. Agaunt with Mike himself, the slowly. Nu til halsforliten bin kom. Til vejen redden kom med, eller det vil du navne forandres, hvis det er ikke om udvundet, altså at når hun skal lægge momentum, jeg har været arts for en passe, og jeg var over den, lægge fri for en fejl, Children trusted saints' friends. They whispered prayers to Saint Nicholas for gifts, to Saint Anne for learning, to guardian angels for protection. In stories, saints were kind, brave, or gentle, making them companions as much as protectors. Churches painted saints on walls and windows. Villagers saw their faces glowing in colored glass or carved in wood, their stories told in images for all to learn. Every Mass was celebrated in their presence, a reminder that the saints prayed alongside the living. Miracles were often credited to saints and session. A healing, a rescue, a sudden storm, and all were ascribed to the prayers of Mary or the patron called upon. Saints' power was proof of God's mercy, channeled through holy friendship. The poor found comfort in saints. They believed saints who once lived in poverty, like Saint Francis or Saint Clare, understood their hunger and prayed with sympathy. Saints were not lofty but approachable, having known toil and pain themselves. Fasting and feasting were tied to saints' days. Lent fasts honored Christ and his saints. Feast days brought tables of abundance. The calendar became a litany of holy helpers, each day a chance to remember and call upon them. To the medieval heart, relics were bridges between earth and heaven, a bone of a saint, a fragment of cloth, a vial of oil, even dust from a tomb. These were not mere objects, but vessels of presence. Through relics, the holy ones who had once walked the earth were believed to still walk beside their people, offering protection, healing, and hope. Churches guarded relics with care. They were kept in ornate reliquaries, gilded boxes, crystal vials, carved shrines, and displayed on feast days. Villagers knelt before them with awe, seeing not bone or cloth but the nearness of the saint. Pilgrims traveled miles to touch or see relics. Compostela, Canterbury, Cologne, Rome, each offered treasures said to hold grace. The weary feet of travelers were driven by faith that a glimpse of such holiness might heal wounds of body and soul. Relics were thought to heal sickness. A child fevered and near death was brought to a shrine, touched with a relic, and rose well. A crippled pilgrim leaned upon a reliquary and walked again. Such stories spread quickly, making relics magnets of faith. Relics all protected, villagers believed carrying relics in procession would drive away storms, end plagues, or shield fields from blight. Farmers prayed, bones or banners passed among crops, asking saints to intercede for harvest. Even wars were shaped by relics. Kings carried them into battle, believing their presence brought victory. Soldiers touched banners embroidered with fragments of saints' garments, lifting courage pennons if heaven itself marched with them. Some relics were tied to great miracles. Cloths to Christ's tomb, thorns from his crown, and nails from the cross. Each was said to radiate grace. To stand near such relics was to stand on the edge of eternity. Villagers also venerated smaller relics, a vial of oil from a saint lamp, a splinter of wood from a holy staff, a drop of blood preserved in crystal. Even the smallest fragment was believed filled with divine strength. Stories told of relics glowing with light, candles burned brighter near them, or flames bent toward them, villages and fields, rolling countryside divided by narrow dirt paths, rivers winding quietly through forests, and clusters of small houses where people gathered together for safety and for community. The village was the heart of life for most people. Cities existed, but they were rare, and only a small portion of the population ever lived in them. The vast majority of men, women, and children lived in villages. Places that were small totally existed. We will carry you into sleep. That is perfectly fine. Children listened to such tales with wonder. They dreamed of relics, treasures brighter than gold, jewels that carried heaven inside them. Their innocence made them especially attuned to marvel, and they prayed with pure hearts before reliquaries. Relics were often touched with cloths, creating secondary relics cost brand. Pilgrims carried these home, tucking them into clothes, burying them in fields, hanging them above doors. These tokens spread grace outward, extending the saint presence into homes. Relics bound villages to the wider world. A small town might boast a finger of St. John, a strand of Mary hair, or a scrap of St. George cloak. These fragments connected remote fields to the great story of Christendom, reminding villagers they were part of something vast. Markets oft displayed relics during fairs. Merchants set stalls near shrines, knowing pilgrims came with offerings. Faith and trade mingled, and relics drew both devotion and livelihood. Some doubted the authenticity of relics, even in the Middle Ages, yet most believed that faith itself made them holy, that God honored devotion even if relics were humble or uncertain. What mattered was not proof, but trust. Relics often sparked rivalry. Towns boasted of their treasures. Pilgrims argued which shrine was greatest. Kings sought relics to glorify their realms. Yet even in competition, relics lifted faith, reminding all of holiness' nearness. Feast days displayed relics most gloriously, carried in processions, set on altars, encircled with candles and garlands. Relics became centers of joy. Songs rose, banners waved, bells tolled. The saint was felt alive once more among the people. In death, villagers longed to be buried near relics. Cemeteries grew beside churches that held them, for to rest in their shadow was believed to bring safety for the soul. The holy presence extended beyond life itself. Children were taught to respect relics deeply. They learned to bow, to cross themselves, to whisper prayers when passing reliquaries. Reverence was instilled early, binding generations to the rhythm of devotion. Travelers told tales of relics defending themselves. A thief who tried to steal one found his limbs frozen or his path blocked by storms. Such stories reinforced belief that relics were not mere objects, but living presences. Some relics drew vast crowds. Pilgrims camped for days near great shrines, waiting to touch cloth or kiss glass. The press of bodies, the murmur of prayers, the tears of devotion, all testified to the relic power. Villagers sometimes swore oaths upon relics. To touch a saint bone and swear truth was binding, for heaven itself was bawd witness. Such vows shaped courts and disputes, ensuring honesty through awe. Children received small relic tokens, gifts, a pilgrim badge, a piece of cloth, tossed to a shrine. They treasured these charms of safety, sleeping with them under pillows, wearing them around necks. Monks and nuns treasured relics, constant companions. They prayed before them daily, touched them gently, wove their presence into chants and psalms. For them, relics were reminders that holiness lingered even in silence. Elders recounted miracles tied to relics. They spoke of healings, rescues, visions, protection. Their voices kept faith alive, reminding children and grandchildren of wonders witnessed. Memory itself became a reliquary, holding sacred stories. Lithics sanctified not only churches but whole villages. Their presence was felt in fields, markets, and homes. People believed crops grew better, wells ran sweeter, and quarries softened when saints' remains were near. The church taught that relics were gifts, not idols. They were honored not for their matter, but for what they signified: lives lived in holiness, bodies offered to God, witnesses to eternity. Relics pointed beyond themselves to the divine. For villagers, relics were tangible hope. They made unseen truths visible, intangible grace. Toucho. To kneel before them was to kneel before a promise that holiness was real, that heaven reached down to earth. So the power of relics endured, carried in processions, touched in prayer, honored in silence. They remained bridges of mercy, connecting humble cottages and vast cathedrals to the eternal presence of God. The medieval world was bound again by words of power. A blessing spoken by priest or parent was believed to shield, guide, and strengthen. A curse muttered by enemy or stranger was feared as a shadow that clung to the soul. Words were not empty but alive, carrying weight that shaped fields, homes, and hearts. Blessings began in childhood. Parents traced crosses on infants' foreheads, whispering prayers for protection. Midwives blessed newborns with water, asking saints to guard them. These words wrapped children like cloaks, teaching them that life was a gift under heaven care. At meals, blessings sanctified food. Bendicite was said before bread was broken, gratas after it was eaten. To eat without blessing was unthinkable, for it meant forgetting the giver. Blessings turned common bread into holy sustenance. Blessings extended to work. Farmers sprinkled fields with holy water, smiths worked crosses on tools, weavers whispered prayers before looms. Labor was believed to prosper when begun with blessing. but if hands worked more faithfully under heaven's gaze. Houses were blessed at Candlemas and Easter. Priests walked from door to door, sprinkling water, chanting prayers, and marking lintels with chalk. Villagers felt safer under these words, believing walls themselves held holiness. Animals received blessings too. Shepherds led flocks to churchyards on Saint Blaise Day. Priests prayed over throats and voices, human and beast alike. Horses, oxen, and even bees were blessed, for all were part of creation harmony. Journeys began with blessing. Travelers knelt at thresholds, then family prayed for their safety. Pilgrims carried staffs arced with crosses, confident that blessing would shield them on the road. Departure without prayer was seen as folly. Marriages were sealed with blessing. The joining of hands was accompanied by words that called heaven to witness. Blessings invoked saints to guard love, fertility, and fidelity, weaving holy promise into human bond. Even tools of war were blessed. Banners, swords, and armor were sprinkled with water, prayers asking saints to shield soldiers. Without such blessings, men feared their cause would falter, for strength was thought to rest in prayer as much as arms. At deathbeds, blessings gave peace. Priests lifted hands over the dying, whispering absolution. Families knelt, murmuring prayers for mercy. The last breath was released under blessing, carrying the soul safely into eternity. Curses, however, cast shadows. A quarrel between neighbors might end in a shouted malediction. Such words were feared, for they were believed to invite demons or sickness. Villagers guarded against curses with charms, relics, and prayers. Witches were said to curse crops, causing blight or storm. Shepherds feared their curses on flocks. Mothers feared them on children. The very suspicion of a curse could drive a community to prayer, penance, or even harsh judgment. Curses would cling to places. A crossroads words murders happened, a field left barren, a well fouled. Villagers whispered of curses that lingered in soil and stone. Blessings by priests were sought to cleanse and heal such places. Some feared the evil eye, a glance of envy, believed to spoil milk, wither plants, or harm children. Mothers tied charms or small relics to cradles, warding off such unseen curses. The eye power was countered by the cross sign. Children were warned against careless words. Elders taught that to mock, curse, or swear unjustly could invite harm. Words were not playthings, they were seeds, growing into blessings or burdens. Birds were fine, we haben dweil, was we, koler genje, vrat, alsies and mask, that starter gans doft alp concision. Priests condemned curses, but acknowledged their power. They reminded villagers that, God judged, but they offered prayers of protection, exorcisms, and absolution to rake shadows of spoken malice. Faith was the shield against fear. Blessings and curses often inwove in daily life. A storm might be feared bids curse, until rain revived crops, and was hailed they blessing. A child mischief might seem curse, until wisdom grew from the lesson. Life was not fixed in shadow or light, but moved between them. Communities sometimes responded to curses with ritual. A field thought cursed might be circled with relics. A well-fouled kinsmuck missiles. Collective prayer turned fear into faith, breaking darkness with shared words of blessing. Blessings were uttered at festivals, processions through lanes, crosses lifted over fields, hymns sung by children, all filled villages with holy words. People believed blessings spread like fragrance, lingering long after songs ended. In childbirth, blessings were vital. Mothers feared curses of difficulty or loss, but priests and midwives countered with prayers, relics, and holy water. To be born under blessing was to begin life in safety. Travelers carried blessings into distant lands. Pilgrims believed their staffs, rocked with crosses, carried holiness wherever they went. They offered blessings to strangers, and in return received shelter and food. Blessing became the language of trust across distances. The elders blessed children at night, tracing crosses on foreheads before sleep. The gesture reassured little ones and reminded them that no darkness was beyond God care. To sleep under blessing was to rest in peace. Curses were sometimes broken through confession. A person who had cursed another might repent, confess to priest, and perform penance. Forgiveness lifted the weight of words, teaching that mercy was stronger than malice. Stories abounded of blessings overcoming curses. A cow cursed to sicken rose after prayer. A child failing in health revived after relics were touched to bed. The triumph of blessing reinforced faith, proving light stronger than shadow. Children played at blessings, imitating priests with sticks and whispered prayers. Their games revealed how deeply the rhythm of blessing shaped life, even in laughter. The very act of pretending showed reverence. Villagers often greeted one another with blessings. God keep you, peace be with you. Christ guard your steps. These greetings were daily reminders that each encounter could carry holiness. In storms of fear, blessings anchored souls. A mother whispered prayer, a priest raised hand, a saint intercession, all carried assurance that curses would not triumph. Hope was planted in the soil of holy words. Thus the medieval world was filled with blessings and shadowed by curses. Both were taken seriously, for words were alive. Blessings guarded fields, homes, and hearts. Curses reminded of danger, but blessings taught that light prevailed. To live was to walk between blessing and curse, choosing which to speak, which to trust. Villagers leaned always toward blessing, praying for its strength, whispering it to children, invoking it at bed and grave. So blessings remained the stronger voice. In a world haunted by curses, they spoke of protection, mercy, and love. The medieval soul believed that holy words shaped life, and that blessing, once spoken, could ripple into eternity.